All right, how's it going, everybody? Gamma Fighter here, coming at you with a Sylvaneth faction overview. I just haven't seen very much discussion on Sylvaneth uh, on YouTube in English. I've seen a lot in Spanish, but my Spanish is not good enough to be able to follow along. So um, I just wanted to think it through myself and talk it out myself instead of waiting for someone else to do it. So um, I'm not going to read everything. I'm going to try and go over everything pretty quick because there is a lot to cover. Um, but I do want to cover the battle traits, the changes. This healing is now D3. It's at the end of the turn instead of 1 at the start of the turn. That's a big difference. It's much more, it's also happens during your opponent's turn as well. And on average is twice as much, average of 2 healing. So um, it's a lot more healing now. And before it would only be once at the beginning of your turn for 1. So that's a lot more healing. That's something to consider. Um, with this, I'm trying to think of how did the game designers intend for us to play this faction? What do they think is good? What do they think is the right way to play it? And that may help us to build better lists and think about how to use the units effectively. Also, the changes here, going to 6 inches from 9 is pretty bad. But the really big difference is that now we don't have overgrown terrain. So we're starting the game with just one piece that we can use, which means we can't use it. You can't tell you have to use 2 different pieces to be able to teleport. So for Walk the Hidden Paths and for Strike and Fade. So um we don't have battle traits. uh Except you can heal in your deployment zone, but that's it. Unless you summon more trees or have another way of doing that. So um, that's big. That's pretty important. Looking at the sub factions, the battle formations, um, this is another defensive push. Instead of healing for D3, you're healing for 3. Now it's twice as often as in 3rd edition, and you're healing 3 times as much each time. So it's 6 times more effective than it was in 3rd edition. That's a lot more healing. It feels like they're pushing us to a more defensive style. Um, this one is not good because the Kurnoth are the best infantry, and adding one to Rend when they charge does not make stuff like the Spite Revenants and the Tree Revenants good for combat. The reducing the control score, this feels like if you don't have very good monsters, then you want to use this one because the control score may swing certain objectives to you that you would have lost otherwise. But generally, at 2,000 points, you're trying to kill everything that's on the objective, and that's how you take an objective. You don't do it by winning the control score by 1. So I don't think it's that great, but it's if you don't have very many monsters, it might be worth it. And then this last one it's essentially worthless. Um, this is if you want run in charge, you bring Belthanos, and you can do it 3 times per turn instead of just 1. It's okay. it's it's just so much better if you're trying to do that. Bring Belthanos, and then it doesn't. You can do it on Durthu. You can do it on Kurnoth Hunters. Like it's not just for cavalry too. So it's weird that Belthanos's War Scroll ability is like so much better than this battle formation. So um, uh, I'm not super thrilled with the heroic traits. I can see a world where ignoring prayers and spells can be good um, against certain armies, but I don't think it's that great. Um, I don't think an extra 2 move is all that great either. If this was +2 to charge as well, then we'd be talking. But I just don't think it's that useful. It seems like Spell Singer is going to be sort of the default choice. You can make something that's not a wizard into a wizard, or you can give one of your wizards +1 to cast, which is pretty solid. It's only when they're with Awakened Wildwoods, but then if you have wizards, it enables you to summon more Awakened Wildwoods. So it's self-perpetuating. A clear winner to me. Um, I don't hate the other two, but trying to go through quick. Seed of Rebirth, I don't love. It happens once per game, or 0 to 1 times per game, and it happens on a 3-up, which means if you roll a 1 or a 2, you're going to be big sad. So I don't love it. I think, maybe there are times when it's effective. You could have like the Warsong Revenant be your only non-unique hero, and then you could put this on them as insurance policy. But not that great. Greenwood Gladius is just some chip damage, some mortal damage. We actually have quite a bit in this army in the faction, so a little bit more is pretty cool. Um, and then the Crown of Fellbowers seems to be the clear winner, but I don't know how useful it is. Because I'm thinking a lot of times this for me is the artifact is gonna be going on Spirit of Durthu, and Durthu is already wounding on twos, and so this doesn't help him. And then anything that he attacks, he deletes, usually. At least he's trying to. So then there's not going to be any enemy left for your other Sylvaneth unit to fight because you do have to be in combat. So this would be like if you have two friendly units, including the hero with the artifact, in combat against two enemy units, and then you delete one, and then you give +1 to wound on the other one. I don't know how useful that is. Um, you wouldn't want to put it on something like an Arch-Revenant, because you have to be in combat. So, and I guess they already give +1 to wound anyways. That's why you wouldn't want it. Anyways, this seems like a clear winner, but I don't know how useful it is actually going to be in practice. I think most of the time I'm going to default to the Greenwood Gladius, possibly the Seed of Rebirth, just as an insurance policy. Um, So the spell lore is also really revealing. So this is the main way that we get um, new Awakened Wildwoods. We can only have a maximum of 3. Um, so I think this means wizards are going to be pretty important for this army. That we do have a lot of wizards, which is good. Um, and this is unlimited as well. So if you have multiple wizards and the first one fails, you can try again with another wizard. So you can make it pretty consistent to get trees out, which I think is important. Um, the other two spells rely on the trees too, the Awakened Wildwoods, which is really important. It's pretty bad, but it also means that you really need to be putting down more trees. And it makes it really bad that there's only 3 that we can summon a max of 3 total on the battlefield. This gives +1 to rend while they're within the 6-inch range of the trees, wholly within. It's pretty limiting, but the adding 1 rend is a solid damage buff. Uh, this one does damage to the enemies when they're within 6 inches of an Awakened Wildwood. Thankfully, they don't have to be wholly within, but it can deal mortal damage to them as well. It's a horde killer kind of as well, which is all right. Useful role to have. But all of these, well, mostly the bottom 2, tell me that they really want us to be near the trees. And as we look at the war scrolls, we see that as well. So I think that's all. Yeah, because the rest is the manifestations. Then we get into the war scrolls. So thinking about how things have changed and how they may want us to be playing now. The hints that the designers put into the abilities and the bonuses and all that kind of stuff. What do they want us to do? How are they expecting us to play this army? If we just kind of march up the middle of the board, I don't think our war scrolls are robust enough to go toe to toe with every other army with all of their bonuses, with all of their cheating that they do. With their turn 3 strike first on the Ideneth Deepkin. I don't think we have war scrolls that are like just powerful enough on their own to be able to overcome that. So I think there are probably 2 or 3 main ways that they want us to play the army. The first one is what I've been hinting at. Just based on especially the spell lore, it feels like they want us to put 2 trees in the middle of the board, centralized to the objectives that are going to be key, and they want us to force engagements there. And when I say in the middle of the board, I don't mean right next to each other, but far enough apart that you can teleport between them and that kind of thing, but mainly on key points. You can't put them right on top of objectives. I'm not saying that. I'm saying in places that are going to be key to the battle. They want us to put them there and force the engagements to happen there. On some maps, some battle plans, it's going to be very difficult to do, but I feel like on most of them, we are going to be able to do that. Uh, I don't know how effective though. Some armies are going to have like a lot of shooting, like the Caradhran or Overlords, and they're going to stay really far away from our trees and be totally fine with that. Um, Again, there's going to be exceptions to this, but uh, from what we've seen up to this point in the index, in the faction pack, um, it seems like they want durable units forcing engagements on key points uh, very close to Awakened Wildwoods. That's the one play style I see. The other one is building around either Alarielle or Belthanos, and possibly around both of them, but I would consider them separate as two different play styles. And I think they probably are stronger separate. Um, and we're going to look at Alarielle first, but so I think we can just go there. She's the first War Scroll, but she has enough going on that you can kind of build around her. She has a lot of health. She's got a 3-up save. She's got a 6-up ward. She can heal herself at the beginning of the turn. You probably want to take Lord of the Clans, the heal for 3 instead of D3 at the end of the turn, because she's a monster. And so she's got a ton of healing. And instead of summoning Awakened Wildwoods to force engagements around, you can just have her be a center point of the battle and be an anvil that's going to be super hard to move, do some solid damage, and then have your units based around her. I think that's uh, a viable play style going forward. Um, I don't think her spell is incredible, but there's gonna be times when it works. I mean, 2d3 mortal damage is pretty good on 7 to cast. If you can give her the bonus first, then you have to roll 6 on the dice, which is pretty consistent to do 2d3 damage, which is not bad. And you're probably not going to be destroying a unit, but if you do, then you can summon an Awakened Wildwood, which is pretty strong. Her impact hits are pretty good. Um, her damage is all right. So, for a hero, it's good, but with heroes, their utility has to make it up for it, because at least in Sylvaneth, most of the heroes don't just do enough raw damage to compete with the Kurnoth hunters and that type of thing. So her extra utility really does. The impact hits is pretty good, but the mortal damage from the spell is good. But the really big thing is that she can bring back units, including herself. So this is what I sort of think of her as a really big durable unit that can come back to life, that can heal a ton, and that can bring back other friendly units. So I think that's a awesome way to play, and a great way to build around. And I think that's going to be super viable. It's going to have its limitations, but I think it'll be great. I think it'll be fun way to play. Um, I wonder if I should just skip to Belthanos here, because he would be the third play style that we could consider. So let's just do that. He is also very defensive, very bulky. He's got a 12-inch flying move, which is good. I didn't really talk about Alarielle, but she's got a 14-inch flying move. Huge base though, so it's not like she's super easy to get around. But Belthanos costs about half as many points as Alarielle, and he does a little bit more than half as much damage as she does. So it's pretty easy to think of him as a mini Alarielle. And similarly, though, his damage really can't compare to some of the pure damage machines like Kurnoth Hunters. So his added utility is going to have to make up for it, and I think it really does. Um, let's go in reverse order. I'm going to start with the big thing first. He gives 3 friendly Sylvaneth units run and charge. There's no limit to the range on this. It's not once per game. This is a really huge ability. It adds a ton of mobility to the army, and this is a great thing to build around. Belthanos himself, he does like pretty good damage, and he's like quite defensive. But for how much he costs, you're really bringing him for the added utility that he brings to your team, that great mobility. The other ability, the other 2 abilities, they're pretty strong too, though. He is his rampage does that, roll a D3 and on a 2-up you do damage. But then you can teleport around as long as you stay within 1 inch of one of the units that engaged you. And that's going to be really useful to get onto points, to get out of the way of things, to get into combat with some foot wizard or something like that. There's going to be a fair amount of times. I'm not saying that this is useful every combat. There's going to be a fair amount of times where it doesn't really help. It's just the D3 thing. But there's going to be times when this earns you points. It denies your opponent points or it earns you points, and that's huge. That's a really big deal. The other ability is a way to cheat out an Awakened Wildwood. You can get the overgrown terrain essentially from before, but just one, and this is once per battle. But it happens at the start of any turn, and it turns it into an Awakened Wildwood for the purposes of the battle traits. And it also gives Place of Power. So you can have that Spellsinger effect, have something near an Awakened Wildwood, and also near this piece of terrain that's a Place of Power. They can get +1 to, or +2 to cast, I believe. I think they stack. If they don't, it's not as good, but +2 is huge if it does work. So I think this is the third, and probably the best viable way to build. And my only problem is what I said earlier. I don't think we really can just go toe to toe with stuff. But if we can run in charge and really get in there and have a better ability to pick our engagements and maybe gang up on things or get around the map and that kind of thing, it may be enough. It may be enough. I know Belthanos has been really good in 3rd edition, and I think he probably has a chance of being the best playstyle for 4th edition as well. All right, so let's go back. Lady of Vines, on the other hand, I think she is a key unit for the first play style of just being really durable and forcing engagements around the Awakened Wildwoods. She's pretty fragile for how much points she costs. She has 8 health and a 3-up save. She's a monster, so she can't be defended by the Lookout Sir or whatever it's called, Guarded Hero effect. That's a huge downside. And that's my least favorite thing about her. She is way too fragile. Now, yeah, her damage isn't great. This thing, the range attack, it's not going to work a lot of the time, but when it does work, it's some nice bonus damage. And then her combat profile is pretty good, except it's just kind of 6 attacks. Like Ren 2 damage to crit mortals is great, but it's 6 attacks. It would be great if it was on like a unit and there was like 5 models in the unit, sure. Obviously, they wouldn't have 6 attacks each, but all that to say, like, she really does perform very poorly when you look at overall damage and efficiency of her damage compared to how much points she costs. So she really needs the rest of her War Scroll to make up for it. She also counts as an Awakened Wildwood, which can be really useful. You can be teleporting on turn 1 with her. So I just don't know how useful that teleport's going to be, but it could be, could be useful in a lot of situations. It's hard to really visualize the movement and stuff without actually being in the games. But there could be times where you do want to get teleported. You could have a bug rider seize the center. You could have a bug rider run up the middle to grab that center, and then you could have a tree revenant teleport. using their War Scroll teleport, and then you could have her walk up and then have someone teleport to her to seize the center and grab that. So just off the top of my head type of thing. I wasted way too much time on that. It's probably a pretty useful ability. I really like her other two abilities like a whole lot, a whole lot. So her War Scroll spell is great. I loved it in third edition and I love it in fourth edition. A 5-up ward makes a huge difference in the survivability of your units. Even units that already have a 6-up ward, a 5-up ward is just a lot better. And I wish it was more reliable, but casting on a 7's not terrible. It's pretty consistent. It's a little over half, but there's definitely going to be times when you wish you could have it that you don't. You can countercast this to try and get it off more often, but it goes away at the beginning of your turn. So if you get it in your opponent's turn, it goes away at the beginning of your turn. But then you do have it during your opponent's turn when they're probably going to be attacking you. So there's trade-offs there. But I really love this spell. The 5-up ward really adds to the durability. And that's why I say if you're going for a more durable type of a build of an army, I think she's a really solid choice. Her rampage is it's exquisite. It's chef's kiss. It's beautiful. It's on a 2-up, which you can't get much better than that. I mean, they want you to roll the dice, so 2-up is the best that you can get. But she can give the enemy unit -1 to hit. That's great. And it's really, really good. That can really impact the damage that your opponent is trying to do. And if the Treelord has a similar one, it's on a 3-up that they subtract -1 to wound on the enemy. If you pair them together, it's a huge impact to the damage potential of your enemies. You can effectively have the damage that they're putting out, which is just massive. It's really hard to understate how good it is. And even without the -1 to wound as well, this is a really solid ability. It's even better though because it's flexible. You can use this on offense as well. So you can add 1 to hit rolls for your ally units. So she can be in combat. You can have some Kurnoth hunters with her, and she can just give them +1 to hit and just wreck whatever they're fighting against. Or, I mean, even if it is your turn, if she's in combat, you can have whoever, she's not going to be fighting on her own, hopefully, or else, you messed up real bad. But you can, since you're alternating activations, you can activate the other unit that's in combat first, and then for the enemy that she's in combat with, give them -1 to hit and just neuter their damage. And then it doesn't matter that you're going second, after they already attacked, because you've just nerfed their damage so much. It's not going to nullify their damage, but it's going to be a big help. If you have to choose between 2 engagements, this can really help make a difference. So I love the Lady of Vines. Full disclosure, I loved her in third edition too. I really think she's a just really cool utility. And I really like her in fourth edition now. I do think that Alarielle, Belthanos, and the Lady of Vines are kind of the big 3 heroes for this edition currently, the way that things are working out right now. I think you want between 1 or 2 of each of these heroes. I don't think you'd want to run all 3, although I guess you could try it. But I think you want at least 1 of these guys and I think it's going to define the way that you're playing, as I've already talked about the 3 major play styles. All right, next is Drycha. Yeah, Drycha's really fallen from grace. So she's got a bit of better wheel than the Lady of Vines. Oh, I forgot to say, the Lady of Vines, she's a wizard too, obviously. She's casting spells, but forgot to point it out. Drycha's a wizard 1. Drycha's got a bit more health and a little bit better movement than Lady of Vines. But the problem with Drycha is that a lot of her value is in her combat. And her combat's just not good enough to support that. Most heroes in the faction, they're not trying to get by on their stats, their damage profile, or their defensive profile. They they do okay with those, and then they have to make up for it in utility. I think with Drycha, they were trying to have her be mostly combat oriented and kind of a well-rounded, like solid damage with some support and that Wizard 1 stuff. The thing is, her damage just doesn't cut it, in my opinion. Um, she's got this, 12-inch range, 20 attack shooting, which because she can enhance it, which you would think would be really good, but it's hitting on 4s and wounding on 4s. On average, you're only wounding 5 times at rend 1, damage 1. That's nothing. That's just not good enough for how much she costs. And then her melee profile just doesn't make up for it, in my opinion. Obviously she does a bit better against infantry, but she's consistently on the lower end of damage and lower end of efficiency in terms of how many points she costs for the damage that you get, compared to the rest of the army. And I think she has worse utility. She's almost costs as much as Belthanos, and she's just not nearly doing well. Actually, she may be doing more damage. I forget about that actually. But her utility really doesn't even come close. And in terms of, the Lady of Vines, she does a bit better damage than the Lady of Vines, and she has better range damage for sure. I don't want to take that away from her. It's pretty like it's strongly ahead of the Lady of Vines. It's not super close, but she's not that much further ahead in damage to really justify the huge drop in utility. Lady Vines has 3 abilities that I love, every single one of them. Each one I love more than the last. Drycha, her 3 abilities are just not that good. One enhances her damage, but even with that enhancement, it's not very good. The other one lowers the enemy control score. Sometimes that will be useful, but most of the time you're trying to beat your enemy's control score by removing the unit. So it's hard to gauge how useful it'll be, but I don't foresee it being super useful. So that leaves, she's got essentially no utility on these 2 abilities. It leaves this one. This is a spell. It's on a 6 to cast, which is pretty reliable. It gives +1 to hit, but it only works against infantry units. And it gives a better bonus to Spite Revenants and Twist Wield. That's not very good though. It's just not good enough. This is half of the Lady of Vines' Rampage, except that this you can cast at 12 inches. You don't have to be in combat, which I forgot to mention. That's a pretty big downside. You generally don't want the Lady of Vines in combat. She's pretty fragile, but okay, that's the biggest downside of the Rampage. If you got the 5-up ward, she's pretty durable, and your opponent may elect to target the Sylvaneth Hunters or whatever to try and reduce their damage output. Probably, I don't know. But I skipped over that, but that is a really significant downside for her. And that's a bonus for this, but in every other way, it's worse. It's limited. It's only infantry. It's not on a 2-up, it's on 2d6, 6-up. Pretty consistent, but not a 2-up. It only works on adding 1 to hit rolls. It can't reduce the enemy's damage. If you try and use it on your opponent's turn, then you have +1 to cast, and it costs a command point compared to the Lady of Vines' Rampage, So Drycha used to be my favorite hero in 3rd edition. I considered her an auto include. She had the best shooting in the army, but now it's just pretty bad. And she had Wizard, and she could stomp, and she could roar and stuff like that. They took away the benefits of Monster, and she's just got the 1 cast now. And I just don't think she's worth it anymore. Certainly not at this current points cost. Already went over Belthanos. Okay, the Warsong Revenant. Warsong Revenant is paper, and you do not want to get it into combat. It has a native 6-up ward, but this is what I was saying about, like, you really want to defend this and keep it safe, and you may want to bring the Seed of Rebirth in case it does get knocked out, it might be able to survive with 1 health left. Uh, Really cool thing if you're going for a durable kind of a build, it can give a 6-up ward within 12 inches around it. I really like that. This War Scroll spell, it's okay. It's more mortal damage. It's not nearly as good as the 3rd edition War Scroll spell, which was cracked, and people would build, completely around it. But this is still pretty good, if you consider it alongside all the other chip damage, the chip mortal damage that the faction has, it's pretty good. This one can go against a lot of units, whereas the faction spell goes against one like big unit with a lot of models. I think a really big key to this is also, it's a wizard too, by the way. Another big key is that it gets +1 to unbind and to banishing when it's near an awakened wildwood. +1 to unbind is so rare right now. It's really, really useful. Yeah, I think this is great. And yeah, I mean, bonuses to unbind are so rare now. I think the main thing you would want to take it for, some armies aren't going to have wizards. They're not going to be summoning manifestations. But I think this is a really good reason to bring it. Always on 6-up ward is really useful. And if you have the Lady of Vines as well, you can cover most of the board with an aura that is going to give either a 6-up ward or a 5-up ward. And I think that's a pretty solid reason to take this guy. Wizard 2 got a little bit of mortal damage too. So I think the Warsong Revenant's pretty solid choice. That's where you'd want to use it. The Arch-Revenant's also made out of paper, although I guess it's got 1 health less and but one better save. So her damage is really not good enough to justify 170 points for her at her current cost. Even if you add 1 to attacks and 1 to wound rolls, still it's not very good. If you're in combat, you probably want to do the ward 4-up so that hopefully you'll have an ally there and your opponent will ignore her and attack the allied unit instead. Might be enough to deter them. Really, she needs to make up for her whole 170 points. She's got a 12-inch move, flying move. That's pretty good. She can keep up with whatever. She needs to keep up with the Kurnoth Hunters, and she can give +1 to wound rolls. Most of the time, you're probably going to be hitting 1 unit, probably a reinforced unit, so it is going to have a big impact, but I don't think it's worth 170 points. Sometimes, if you really build around this unit, this hero, then you'll have 2 Kurnoth Hunter units in range that'll be affected by this and get the bonus. Then it might be worth it if you can do that consistently. I just don't think that's going to happen that much. I don't think it's worth building around. I think where you would use this is maybe if you're going for like Belthanos and then just all out aggression, Bug Riders and Kurnoth Hunters and stuff like that. And you want a cheap hero because you can't fit it in a 1-drop. You need another drop and you need a cheap hero. You can put the Arch-Revenant there. Give it Spellsinger maybe so that it can cast on the first turn, maybe get a tree out. And then give that bonus to the Kurnoth Hunter units. That's a way I could see her being used. I still think 170 is a little steep for her, but it could be worse. I don't really use her in the builds that I look at though. Spirit of Durthu, nice and tanky. It's got the Treelord profile, defensive profile as we'll be looking at. And it's got really solid damage for a hero. I said that most heroes in Sylvaneth are not relying on their damage output. Spirit of Durthu is the exception. The Rampage is not very good. You don't want to be subtracting from the enemy's attack profile. And in particular, I think monsters tend to not have a ton. I mean, I guess they can. Sometimes the rider will have 2 profiles and then the mount will have 1 profile. So sometimes you're subtracting a total of 3 attacks. It's okay, but generally you want to stop the enemy monsters. You want to disarm them by killing them. And he's pretty good at that. So yeah, it's pretty limited as a Rampage. Not useless, but pretty limited. And then this bonus, adding 1 to hit rolls when the enemy's near an awakened wildwood is all right. I think you will try to force engagements near an awakened wildwood, as I've said, but they have to be in combat range at this point, and I think they're going to try to avoid that if possible. I can see like, your units being within 6 of the awakened wildwoods and the opponent being, like right on the edge of that. But I really can't see the opponents very often wanting to be within 3 inches of an awakened wildwood. But I just think of it as an added bonus. When I'm looking at his damage profile, I'm not going like, oh, he hits on 2s and wounds on 2s. He hits on 3s and wounds on 2s. I don't really think of it that way. I think this is like an extra bonus that you can capitalize on for how much he costs. He's never going to reach the heights of like Kurnoth Hunters in terms of raw damage output or even efficiency, but he is pretty efficient. He's pretty bulky on one big body. I like the Spirit of Durthu. I think, full disclosure, the way I think of running a 2-drop army in this faction is Lady of Vines is the general and Spirit of Durthu is the other drop. And I try to make that work. So I like the Spirit of Durthu. Treelord is great. It's cheaper than the Spirit of Durthu, but it's got the same defensive profile. The thing is, the damage drops off quite a bit. It's not the worst in the faction, this isn't like a foot wizard type of damage, but for how much you're paying, you're not really getting that efficient damage. It's nice that some of it is ranged and it's got shoot and combat. And this anti-charge +1 rend, this really clearly indicates they want you to use it as an anvil. And that's what it's best as. It's best as an anvil. You can heal them up and try and keep them topped off. You can teleport them away if they get low and let them heal up. You're going to be wanting to run the Lords of the Clans sub-faction so they can heal 3 every turn instead of D3. You're definitely going to want them to be near a tree so that they can continue to heal. If you're going for that defensive style, Treelord is great. The only problem is that they're heroes now, and so you need to be bringing Spirit of Durthu or Treelord Ancient. Otherwise, they are counting as an extra drop, which is a huge downside. That's a really big downside. I don't know how key the number of drops that you have is going to be, but in 3rd edition, Battle Regiment was like the thing to bring, like almost every competitive list was running Battle Regiment so that they could do 1 drop. So generally competitively, as few drops as possible is going to be really important. Probably spoke to it on that too much. The other thing that pushes us towards being a anvil is the rampage I mentioned before. On a 3-up, enemy unit gets -1 to wound. That's really strong, especially on a very defensive unit, and especially if you pair it with the Lady of Vines. If you can get it -1 to hit, -1 to wound, 14 health, 3-up save, and a 5-up ward, that's dangerous. Like, it's going to be tough to lift a Treelord. Now, in that scenario, the Lady of Vines is also in combat, which kind of defeats the purpose because then the enemy would rather target her. But still, the Treelord can get pretty defensive in this army, and I do like it. I like bringing Durthu and then dropping a Treelord in there with it, with the Durthu as well. This other ability, sometimes it's going to matter, sometimes it's going to be important. I just don't think it's that important to really think like, oh, this is why I'm taking the Treelord. No, you're taking it for the body because it's relatively cheap for how defensive it is for getting -1 to wound against the enemy. That's good. And then the Treelord Ancient. I just don't like it as much. It costs almost as much as the Spirit of Durthu and has a really significant damage drop-off compared to Durthu. Still just as defensive, of course. What you're really getting is a wizard and the Ground Shaker Stomp, getting a strike class to the enemy on a 4-up. That's still really good. I just don't think it's worth it. I think the time that I bring the Treelord Ancient is if I'm going Durthu, Treelord, and then the other regiment is Treelord Ancient with another Treelord. If I'm going like full-on monster mash, yeah, I'll bring a Treelord Ancient. This War Scroll ability, it's not a War Scroll spell, but the War Scroll ability Also relies on the Awakened Wildwood, and it does more chip damage, which is fine. It doesn't take up your casting, so definitely this is better than if it was a spell, a War Scroll spell. So yeah, it's just free damage if the what is it, the enemy has to be within the combat range. Yeah, so if they do get in the combat range, you can chip away at them. So that's all right. Um, okay, next the Branch Witch. Uh, it's made of paper. You need to protect it. It's a foot wizard. Um, Actually kind of surprising. You're going to be able to do some chip damage with this shooting attack every once in a while. Um, yeah, it's not good. It's the same as Drycha's, you know, fours and fours, rend one damage one, but only 6 attacks instead of 20. But it has crit auto wounds. So yeah, for a dumb little foot wizard, it's fine. You're not dinging it for the damage, but it's like, oh, it's a nice little bonus. I get a little bit of chip damage too. Um, Mostly, I think you're taking this for the wizard one, and occasionally, um, you will enjoy the effect of this strike first. It gives you a little bit more range. She has to be near the wildwood, but the ally can be 12 inches away, which is fine. It's like a lot less limiting than some of these other abilities. On a 3-up, you get strike first. 3-up is pretty reliable. Strike first is great, a great effect. So that's fine. The issue is that's all she's doing. She's casting one spell and then threatening to give strike first during your opponent's turn. It's pretty good. I just don't know if it's worth a drop. It's almost certainly worth the points. So I wish she could go in another hero's regiment, but she can't. She has to be a whole new drop. This would be another case where like you're running Belthanos or Alarielle and you just want to do 2 drops, but you don't care about the other hero. You just want as cheap as possible and maybe a little bit of added utility. You take either the Arch-Revenant or you take the Branch Witch. And I think that's where you'd want to use these. All right, the Gossamed Archers. These guys had the ultimate glow up, and everything stayed the same, except they cost way less now from compared to third edition. And that was all it took. Because it turns out that being cheap and still being able to be effective is good. So these guys have a 12-inch flying move. They are paper thin as well. You are definitely not using them defensively. Their damage isn't crazy impressive until you consider the fact that it's at range and they're very cheap. So they are actually quite efficient, especially considering that they're range damage. The way I like to think of them is as objective monkeys. Um, with the 12-inch fly, they're not going to have quite the mobility of a tree revenant that can teleport pretty much anywhere, but you can only teleport one tree revenant per turn. So I do like to pair one of these with a unit of tree revenants, and then together they can basically cover the whole board for scoring battle tactics, for capturing open objectives. And the Gossamed archers have the added benefit on top that they can plink away at the enemy. They're going to get a little bit of chip damage through, which is a great, fantastic use of a sort of objective monkey that's pretty cheap. If I could run 2 tree revenants and use both of their teleports every turn, I would. And I might even run 2 tree revenants even if I can't teleport both of them. The Gossamed archers are 10 points more. They can't teleport, but they are very mobile and they have a little bit of chip damage. I do really like them. If you have some space available in your army, I think they're totally worth taking. The twist wield, I'm gonna skip. I'm just not a fan. These guys are, I see them as glorified tree revenants. I don't want to dive too much into it. If you guys can see another use for them, like this ability is like not very useful. They've got a little bit of shooting, but you know, it is 18 inches, but I'm getting too far into it anyways. If there is a use for it, please let me know if these guys are good. It would be great if they were. I'm just not interested in these. Spite Rider Lancers. So these guys are pretty durable. They come in 3 units of 3, so it's a total of 5 health on a 4-up save. Or sorry, 15 health on a 4-up save. Um, The big thing is that they get double the damage when they charge, both the rider and the mount. That's a big deal. That puts them into being really competitive in terms of their damage output. Um, I really think of it as being the Kurnoth Hunters with great swords. It's sort of a spoiler to what's coming up ahead. The Kurnoth Hunters with great swords, the Kurnoth Hunters with size, the Spite Rider Lancers, and then the Revenant Seekers. Um, but that's only when they charge. So those are like the top four. Dirthu's right behind them, number five. So the Spite Rider Lancers are a really solid uh, hammer choice. They're quite durable. They deal good damage, but they're trading a bit of their damage compared to Kurnoth Hunters for that 12-inch fly move. And mobility is really key in any tactics game. And in this edition so far, obviously it's really early, but it does seem like highly mobile cavalry is really effective right now. And here's the other thing. The Spite Rider Lancers have anti-cavalry plus run Ren. So if the meta is shifting towards heavy cavalry lists, then these guys are going to be better and better. And they're going to compete on damage with the Kurnoth Hunters much better. And they're going to have the mobility as well. They also have a chance of doing strike first. It's, of course, it's better when it's more reliable. A 3-up is pretty good though. So that shouldn't be ignored. If you can get 2 activations in a row, I mean, if you have 2 units of these guys reinforced and you charge with both of them, probably one of them is going to get strike first, and then it doesn't matter if the other one has strike first or not. If those are the only 2 combats, it's your turn. You're going to be activating first. So, and notably too, this does work on your opponent's turn if you countercharge with these guys. So that's really useful too. Very strong unit. They heal themselves a little bit too. That's great. Um, it's going to help out from time to time, save you a model every once in a while. But they they have really solid damage and high mobility. These are a great option as a hammer. The Revenant Seekers, the damage does drop off quite a bit. The mount still has charge a +1 damage, which is great. The rider doesn't, so it's a big downside, but they get crit mortal instead, which is just more reliable damage. But if you were doing double damage, it would be better. The main reason that you're taking these guys, so against like super like 1-up armor, 2-up armor saves, then the Revenant Seekers pull out ahead a little bit, but that's going to be like incredibly rare. The real reason you're bringing these guys is as a support. So these guys, if you're running them unreinforced, then they're going to be probably better. Well, not better. They're going to have a different role. You're probably not going to want to reinforce them, whereas the Spite Rider Lancers, you do want to reinforce and just do maximum damage. They're not bad if they're not reinforced. I'm just saying the role is as a big hammer. The Revenant Seekers, you're more likely to run unreinforced with pretty good, still good mobility and decent damage, but it also has this added utility of giving you more healing on your rallies. So this can be useful for like Alarielle or Belthanos or any of the Treelords. Also, it stacks with, I think is it the musician that improves your rally? The Spite Rider Lancers have get +1 rally, so that's 6 going up to 7, and then if the Revenant Seekers give 3 more rally dice, that's 10. And you're looking for 4-ups. Every 4-up is a wound or a heal, life healed. So you have a pretty good chance of rolling 5, in which case you would be able to restore a whole model to the unit because the health characteristic is 5. So it's not going to happen every turn. It's going to cost you a command point, but that's pretty good. Like that's pretty solid. There's definitely a use for these guys. I think the Spite Rider Lancers are a stronger contender because they're more universal as just a hammer, solid hammer unit. But I think conditionally, there's going to be times where you want to use the Revenant Seekers. Next is the Kurnoth Hunters. The Kurnoth Hunter with Greatsword is the premier damage unit. You reinforce these guys, and nothing else in the faction can compete in terms of raw damage output as well as damage efficiency. You know, 4 attacks with 2 damage crit mortals. That's a lot of mortal damage that's going to be coming through. These guys do a lot of damage. They're slow, but they're pretty durable and they output a lot of damage. This is a pretty sizable upgrade compared to any other unit in the army in terms of damage. On an objective, they get Ward 6, which is great utility and improves their survivability. They also have an effect where when they charge, they on average, a reinforced unit is going to get 4 mortal damage. That's a lot of mortal damage. So really great. And that just puts them above and beyond. Maybe they can chip away at something or finish something off, and then they can target what they really want to target with their combat attacks. So the Kurnoth Hunters with swords are the premier unit. The Kurnoth Hunters with scythes do fall off quite a bit. It's not terrible. It's just that crit mortal damage just does so much for the great swords. The Kurnoth scythes are similarly, they're going to be more conditional. When you get charged now, you get that on average, a reinforced unit is going to be doing 4 mortal damage to whatever charged them. It's just such a different role. Like the great swords are a hammer unit. You want them to charge in. You could run the Kurnoth size that same way, and like occasionally you'll get charged, and then you'll be able to do this chip damage before your opponent can even swing at you. That's pretty good, but generally the swords are going to be better. If it wasn't for the crit mortals, the size would just have a better damage profile. They get the extra rend when they're charged, which is a playstyle. If you're going for that more durable playstyle, this is an option. But I generally think you'd still probably want the great swords. You compare this with the branch witch and that strike first on your opponent's charge phase or during their combat phase turn thing. That's an option, but generally the great swords are just so much more, so much better universally, and they're a lot more universal. I don't hate the size, but the swords are pretty considerably stronger. The great bows, they have that same durability. Their damage is all right for being at 18-inch range. They can reach most of the map if you put them in the middle. The big thing is that they can ignore guarded hero. That's what really makes them something to write home about. Against any army that has a foot hero, they're going to have to be afraid of this unit, and it can shape the way that they engage you. So that is a strong ability not to be underestimated. The shooting is not so good that you would go with like, 2 reinforced unit of hunters with great bows and then like 2 reinforced unit of Gossamet archers. Like even that slant of a list is not going to be outputting enough damage to really win consistently, in my opinion. It's nothing like, KO. But this is a great utility to add that its damage is respectable. And then in situations where you're up against a foot hero that really needs to rely on guarded hero, like you're gonna really love that you brought these guys. Dryads are still great. Is a little harder to fit them into the army now. Awakened Wildwoods are a little more restrictive now, but they still are surprisingly tough to take down with their -1 to hit, -1 to wound. Effectively halves the damage that your opponent can output to them, depending on the unit, but it's around half as much damage that they'll be doing. So these guys, if you have 110 points, they're a pretty solid choice that you can put in there. You do have to just keep them by an Awakened Wildwood, which means you really need to summon an Awakened Wildwood. It doesn't count with Belthanos's thing that he turns into an Awakened Wildwood. It doesn't count for Lady of Vines being an Awakened Wildwood. This has to be a real Awakened Wildwood that they're near. So it's pretty restrictive, but in those kind of lists, this is a great choice to bring, and really a tar pit unit that's going to be surprisingly tough to take down. The tree revenants I mentioned before, Nothing on their war scroll matters except their ability, which is that they can teleport unrestricted except more than 9 inches from enemy. Now it can only work once per turn for the whole army. So if you bring 2 of these, you can't teleport both of them, but it's still very useful. Very solid objective monkey for sure. Like these guys will win you games. Spite Revenants. So these guys are also very flimsy. They have crit mortals and 3 attacks, which is pretty good. And they can stop infantry from, from using commands. It's not a big deal. The problem with these guys are they cost half as much as a unit of Kurnoth Hunters, which means you can compare a reinforced unit of Spite Revenants to a regular unit of Kurnoth Hunters, and the Spite Revenants just really can't compete. They're kind of efficient, but not compared to Kurnoth Hunters. So if you have 110 points left, you've already got Tree Revenants, you don't really need a Dryads for any reason. You could put Spite Revenants in and you don't need to be too sad about it. I do think that Spite Revenants are due for a points drop. Once they do the balance changes, I think that's going to happen. Drycha's spell synergizes with them stronger, but I think that Drycha, if you're taking Drycha so you can take Spite Revenants, I think that's a tax. I don't think she's pulling her weight. And I think combined, they don't make up the value of the points that they bring when you could be bringing just more Kurnoth Hunters instead. So I really like these guys in 3rd edition. I just don't think they pull their weight now. All right, so now I'll go briefly over the manifestations. This is the best one, I think, and it's not good. It is pretty good 4s and 2s. Rend 1 damage D3 is pretty good. It's just that it's only 6 attacks, and so you're going to be missing a lot. And yeah, the only good thing about it really is you can, if your opponent leaves their wizard undefended, you can teleport behind their foot wizard 3 inches away and charge in, and then maybe delete a foot wizard if you don't roll too bad. You still need a bit of luck for that, which is sad. Even if you don't kill them, though, you do hinder their ability to cast, which is fine. It's just not worth it. This isn't better than a purple sun, so just bring a purple sun instead. Vengeful Skullroot. Oh, it's the same profile, except half as many attacks. And I already thought that the Gladeworm had too few attacks. So Skullroot is pretty bad too. It's much worse. It has this control score ability. I really don't think it's going to prove to be that powerful. And the Spite Swarm Hive. This was everyone's favorite manifestation from the previous edition, and now it's pretty bad. You can either add 1 to run and 1 to charge, or you can add a 6-up ward. It's just not worth bringing. This is not better than a Purple Sun or a Malevolent Maelstrom or whatever. Then the notable thing about the Awakened Wildwood is that when your enemy is in combat range, then one of your trees can do D3 mortal damage on a 4-up. Not super reliable, but more of that chip damage, chip mortal damage we were talking about. So really just to summarize, Alarielle, Belthanos, and the Lady of Vines, I think, are going to be valuable build-arounds for the 3 different main play styles. I think the number 1 hammer is going to be the Kurnoth Hunter Greatswords. I think the number 2 hammer is going to be the Spite Rider Lancers. I think any of the Treelord guys are going to be great as anvils. And I think the Gossamed Archers and the Kurnoth Greatbows are solid choices for shooting. Those are the most useful units in the army, and that's really where I place them at. I think in the next video, I want to do a deeper dive into the numbers and why I sort of justify my thinking in that way. And then after that, we can take a look at some sample lists of putting those units together in interesting ways. So that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Please give me your thoughts and feedback in the in the comments. Any further things you think I may have missed about different ways to use these units. Redeem Drycha. I love Drycha. Please redeem her for me. Or the Twist Wield. If you think those are going to be good, let me know. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.